in a small, forgotten town on the edge of a dense forest. The townsfolk held a peculiar belief about the stretch of ancient woods looming beyond their village. They called it the Veil Forest. No one ventured into it after sundown, and everyone knew the rule. Never follow a voice that calls your name from the trees. But secrets, like roots, have a way of burrowing deep. The tale began with Danielle, a city journalist chasing an elusive story about the haunting reputation of Veil Forest. Skeptics called it local folklore. The locals called it survival. Daniel scoffed at their warnings and, feeling the thrill of a daring story, decided he would uncover the truth. And so, one late autumn afternoon, he packed his equipment and set off into the ominous woods. Chill clung to the air as Daniel made his way into the forest. The trees, tall and gnarled, twisted like arthritic hands reaching toward the murky sky, their branches heavy with the weight of ancient secrets. The deeper he went, the quieter the forest became, absorbing each of his footsteps until it felt like he was swallowed into silence. Then as the sun dipped below the horizon, a soft, familiar whisper drifted on the breeze, rustling through the leaves like the ghost of a forgotten song. "Daniel." The voice was soft, tantalizing, unmistakably his mother's. He froze, blood rushing in his ears. His mother had passed years ago, leaving a void he never quite managed to fill. Yet there it was, her voice delicate as smoke, luring him deeper into the shadows. "Daniel." It called again, softer this time, as if from some faraway place. He took a trembling step forward, unable to resist. Each step seemed to blur his thoughts, and he began to feel as if he were walking in a dream, pulled along by the voice like a fish on a line. Shadows thickened around him, and the path became narrow, overgrown, as if it hadn't been touched in centuries. Then he saw it, a glimpse of movement in the periphery of his vision. A figure, pale and frail, flickered in the distance, heart pounding. Daniel quickened his pace. His mother's voice was calling him again, this time laced with a pleading urgency. He broke into a run, tearing through brambles and clawing branches, desperate for a closer look. As he reached a small clearing, he stopped dead in his tracks. The figure was gone, but in its place stood a decrepit cabin leaning against the earth as if ready to collapse. The air reeked of rot and the windows were clouded with grime. A single light flickered within, casting a sickly yellow glow. It was a light that seemed to beckon, soft and dim like a lure. He pushed open the door, the wood creaking under his weight. Inside, the room was thick with dust and the smell of decay wrapped around him like a suffocating shroud. The only piece of furniture was a single rotting armchair in the center, and in it sat a figure. It was his mother. Her face was sunken and sallow, her eyes hollow and black, yet unmistakably his mother's. She turned her head slowly, fixing him with an unsettling stare that made his skin prickle. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice rasping, raw with sadness. "You came?" For a moment his mind refused to believe it, but as he stepped closer, his breath faltering, he realized the impossible truth. She had been waiting for him, Mom. His voice cracked, a child's fear breaking through his adult facade. She reached out with a trembling skeletal hand. "I've been so cold, Daniel," she whispered, "so very cold." Instinctively he reached back, their fingers almost touching, when her grip suddenly tightened, vice-like, painfully cold. Her face twisted, morphing from sorrow to anger, her black eyes deepening until they became endless voids. "You left me," she hissed, her voice turning sharp as broken glass. "You left me to rot." Daniel tried to pull away, but her grip held firm, her bony fingers biting into his flesh. Her face, no longer his mother's, had become something monstrous, a contorted mask of rage and hunger. In his struggle, Daniel stumbled back, breaking her grasp, and fell to the floor. He scrambled to his feet, heart pounding as he backed away toward the door. But the cabin had changed. The doorway was gone, the walls closing in like a maw ready to consume him. Around him, the cabin began to pulse and writhe. The walls shimmered and the floor seemed to buckle as if it were alive. Shadows crawled up from the corners, taking on twisted forms that whispered his name, each voice taunting, accusing, echoing his mother's pain and anger. In blind panic, he ran toward what he hoped was an exit, but every corner turned him back toward the center of the room. His mother's figure was there, standing still, her arms outstretched, her black eyes following him no matter where he turned. She moved in strange, stilted steps, almost as if the floor were controlling her, drawing her toward him like a puppet. Daniel's breath came in shallow gasps, and he was dizzy with terror when he finally spotted a window. Grimy and cracked, but real, he lunged toward it, smashing through the brittle glass, feeling a sharp sting as shards sliced into his skin. He fell to the ground outside, his vision swimming as the cool air hit him. He scrambled to his feet, staggering away from the cabin, only to find that the trees around him seemed to have shifted. They twisted toward him, their bark dark and dripping, almost as if they were bleeding. And then he heard it. The voices, not just his mother's, but dozens, hundreds, each one calling his name in a mournful, haunting tone. He ran, branches slashing at his face, roots tripping him until he burst through the edge of the forest and into the pale light of dawn. Behind him, the voices faded, but his mother's remained, lingering in his ears like a forgotten melody. She whispered his name, soft and yearning, as though her soul were trapped, forever waiting. Daniel returned to the town, but he was never the same. His hair had turned gray, his hands shook, and his eyes held the hollow, haunted look of a man who had seen beyond the veil and could never escape it. He tried to write the story, tried to capture what he had experienced, but no words could contain the horror that gripped his soul. They found him one morning, staring at his reflection in the mirror, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. His eyes, once bright and curious, were pitch black, endless voids where his pupils should have been. And in his notebook, written over and over again in a trembling hand, were the words, "She's waiting. She's always waiting." The townsfolk buried him in silence, their own fear hanging heavy in the air, and they whispered to each other of the forest's curse. The Veil Forest had claimed another, and its secrets remained buried deep within its shadowed heart, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to seek them out.